Well, welcome to part 3 of how to paint curly fur. Today we'll be working with the lifting off technique and concentrating mostly on the layering techniques that we need to achieve a really deep feel to the texture of fur. So let's get lifting off, shall we? And let's get started. Well, welcome back once again on how to paint curly fur using watercolours. Now the third technique I'm going to show you today is the lifting off technique. But what we initially need to do is outline all of these lines, okay? So use one of your colours that you've got. Basically the same way we did all this one here. And once you've outlined the lines, then we can start with some colour over the top. But the lifting off process is completely different to the way we did these other two methods. I'm going to go for some burnt umber with a size 2 brush. I'm going to go over all of my lines and probably add additional ones in there as well, in between. And this will help preserve those pencil marks. Doesn't always, but sometimes it does. So when we add those wet and wet washes over the top, there's a good chance at least some of these will stay put. So take your time with it. Get those pencil marks covered over, and also think about continuing some of the hairs that we can see coming from this section here. Okay, that's all those outlined. The next thing we need to do is fill it in. We need to fill it in. So what we're going to do, go for our lightest colour first of all. Make sure there's plenty of water in there, Paul. Yeah, what am I like? Nice and watery though, on that one. Size 2 brush will do, size 4, anything like that will be fine. And I'm basically just going to fill everything in using this colour and also the other colours as well. Because we need some colour on there to be able to lift off. I know. Because very often what I'll do, I'll fill an area in. I think, well, I could do some extra lines there, or some extra areas within that one section. And the lifting off technique is a really good method of creating additional hairs. It really is. So, by applying the paint to the paper first of all, nice and watery still, Paul. Nice and watery. All we need to then do is put the other colours, as I mentioned, around the outside edge. So if I get some of the one with the burnt sienna in, you know the colour mixes now. I'll pop some up on the screen for you. Pop some of that in. Just vary it, nice and watery on that one as well, actually. Just vary those colours. Because I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I spent all that time painting around all those fine lines, only to cover them over. But some of it will still show through, which it will. And that's exactly what I want it to do. This is all more or less a test, really, more than anything, to see how things look. I still prefer my first method by taking my time and painting each individual hair, or each individual clump. But this is just another way where you can create texture and hairs using those lovely watercolours. Because sometimes when I paint an animal and there's plenty of curly fur like this, or any fur really, what can happen is I put too much colour on or too much detail on there, or it's got too dark. And because of that you need to lift off some paint. But in order to lift off some paint, I'll show you the technique in a minute, once you've got all these colours on. To lift off the paint you need to make sure that you've got a good, decent brush to do that with. Not an expensive brush or anything like that. Preferably a stiff bristled brush, a very small one. Or you can make your own. I'll show you that as well. Alright. Or you can use a dedicated lifting off brush as well. It's entirely up to you. Okay, I want to give this a dry, and once it's dry, let the darkest marks in like we've done everywhere else, between these lines, and then we'll play with that lifting off technique. Okay, let's add a little bit of dark in there now. So our dark sort of brown colour, French ultramarine and burnt sienna. But more on the brown side more than anything. I'm going to fill in some small sections like we've done everywhere else. A few sections here and there. Again, we can lift some of this off if need be. And continue some of this through from the middle section as well. Follow those lines and those patterns we can see there. Okay, well that's really dark on there now, isn't it? I've done that on purpose because I want to make sure that we can see where we lifted off, okay? Because very often when you do the lifting off process, it's quite handy having a dark background, something like this really, because at least then you can see where you've removed that paint. If you try doing that on a lighter background, it won't be quite as obvious. Okay, quick dry. Okay, lifting off, here we go. Now I've got 3 different brushes here. I've got my size 00, one of the older ones really. Okay, you can use that for lifting off. It's a very soft synthetic bristle. I've got this one, which is more of a stiff bristle brush, probably more for oil painting, acrylics, that sort of thing. I've got this one. Yeah, okay, alright, yeah. I've made that one. As you can tell, because it's really, really wobbly from a very cheap brush, I think worth maybe about £1 or something like that. And all I've done, I've flattened it with a pair of pliers and then got a craft knife and just trimmed it down to 2 different steps. And then we've got the smaller step right at the very tip. So that's one we can try out as well. But the first one I'm going to use is this one here. Oh, hang on. There is one more. Really? There's this one. I've got 4 different brushes here, look. This is a small, hey, it's worn off a bit, small Rosemary & Co. Eradicator. So that's a good one to use as well. But it's quite wide, which means it's good for straight lines or straightish lines. But for quite tight curves, yeah, not quite as easy for that one. Size 00 brush, wet it, then very lightly take it through that kitchen towel just once. And then what we're going to do with a damp, clean brush, start to lift off paint. Now the way the paint will lift off will depend on the paper, and this is new paper to me. It's not one I normally use, not at all. As I mentioned, this is that sparkly paper. It's got a bit of a sort of sparkly shine on it. So basically, it's a mineral. It's part of their paper making process. So what I'm going to do is very lightly lift this off. The more times you go over a mark, the more you remove the paint. And you can see how much I've taken off already by them 3 little marks there. You wouldn't think it, would you, when you look on the paper? The stiffer bristle brushes, you find will take off much more paint. So if we just do this one again, that. My size 00, keep going over the same line time and time again. Then lift. So I've just taken that off there. And that's what I've created just here. So it's quite pale, but it works. So if I try that again with a stiffer bristle brush, let's try another one. Let's go for my homemade one here, my wobbly ferrule. Alright, try that one. Water, just tap it once or twice. And we'll do the same with that one. Where should we go? Let's try down here. Now that's a much coarser bristle brush, but it's not as fine. But you can see that's taking off much more paint, isn't it? See how bright that is there? So if I go over the same area here, barely caressing the paper, just touching like that, that will lighten that one section. When that's dry, all you need to do is get a dark colour and very lightly just touch it in like that. And there we go. And that's just using a homemade one. So it's worth looking around those discount stores and see what you can find and think, oh, you know what? I think I can make something from that brush. I really do. A technique brush. Yeah. So that's that one. Then we got this one, this beastie here, quite small and very, very stiff bristle brush. Now you've got to be careful with the stiffer bristle brushes. That's not easy to say, you know. Be careful with the stiffer bristle brushes because the more you rub the paper with it, the more the paper will start to ruffle up. In other words, you start pulling pieces off that paper if you're not careful. Again, it will depend on the paper, on the quality of the paper. Probably less so with cotton paper, but with a more budget range, you'll find it might lift some of the paper off as well. So if I try again a line across here, look, a bit more water on the brush, takes off. So a line across here, take some paint away. You can hear it. That's how stiff that bristle is. And that's created a very subtle line. So if I use the dedicated lifting off brush now and do the same thing again, this is that Rosemary & Co. one. You can see that's taking off that paint straight away. And we can carry on all the way around the paper now using whatever brush you want to use. One of your old brushes, don't use a new brush, whatever you do, because it can wear away that tip. Especially when you're working with your fine detail brushes like this one. So just use an old brush to be able to do this with. I'm going to put another line there. Again, because it's quite a wide chisel tip on this one, it's difficult to get a curve as such. We can get some short lines in there. removing some of that paint. And there you go. So I'm going to do some more now, playing with these different brushes that I've got here. And see what effects I can create. And see how much paint I can lift off as well. I know, that's interesting. And remember, the more that you go over that area, the more paint should come off, okay? So if I put a line here, using this particular brush, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Barely touching the paper. And then lift. And again, I'm just taking that long line off there. It's not that bright on there, but you can certainly see where they've been. And not all of the hairs need to be really bright either. Okay, let's carry on and do a few more now. Don't do them all though. Allow some of those darker tones to stay underneath. And then all we need to do is get our size 2 brush, anything will do. Get some of this dried up dark colour I've already got on there. Just tidy up some of those edges. If you think it's not light enough, you can still lighten it another way, and that's by using white paint, which I very often do with my paintings. In fact, I do that for most of my paintings. Just watercolour white, that's all this is. You can use white gouache as well to add that extra effect over the top, and I will show you that before we finish this today, just to give you some ideas of what you can do with all these different methods. I think out of all these methods so far, my preference would be to work on this one because I just think it's neater. I think it's less damaging to the paper as well. Lifting off work can damage the paper, as I said, so you've got to think about that when you're working with that method. Now I've got some white paint all dried up in my little palette there, so let's put that there for a minute. Stay. And a small amount of water in the bottom of it. I'm going to use that water to reactivate that white paint, which is well and truly dried in there. That's staying on my anti-slip? Yeah, just about. So a little bit of water and get it nice and creamy. Okay, pull it away. As I said, you can use white gouache instead. Then you can add this into the mix as well. Now, the more water you add to it, the weaker the white will be. Stay. And your finish will start to fade as it dries. I can use this to highlight certain areas around the fur. That's all I'm doing. Not everywhere though, just certain areas like that. I think that's going to go over that one there. Just little highlights here and there. And doing this will give it more shape as well. But we need to do one more thing after this. One more thing. So stay tuned and I'll show you what that is. Okay, move that out of the way. Clean brush. Go back into your lightest colour, which is basically the raw umber. Nice and watery. You can use that just to very lightly go over the top of that watercolour white. But very lightly in one fell swoop though, one light pass. If you keep going over it, you'll find that white paint will move. This will tone down that white, so it doesn't look too stark. This isn't a white dog after all. It's not an aged dog, is it? Of course it isn't. This is a nice, healthy dog we're painting here. But it could be a cat. Yeah, you decide. So a little bit more around there, and a little bit more around there as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments down below, please. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about painting fur, have a look at the link to the top right hand corner of the screen. I'll see you there.